Nau mai haere mai ki te karanga o te whenua. I'm Jade Gibson, and today we're sitting with Āwhina, who turned grief into purpose and purpose into a blueprint for putting her people back on the land. She grew up driving past a piece of whenua, telling herself one day she'd live there. She didn't know why, she just knew. Years later, after more than 2 decades overseas, her father's death, and a 5-year battle with courts, banks, and her own whānau, Āwhina Motutere is living on that whenua, in the kaimai's off-grid, sustainable home.
My name is Āwhina Motutere. I hail from Tauranga Moana and Mohaka. So my direct lines are Ngāi Te Rangi, where my father is from Te Mautere o Matakana, and my mum is Ngāti Pāhauwera from Mohaka. And I currently reside in Tauranga Moana in the kaimais. The whole journey started when I was a child. I always felt a connection to that whenua. I used to drive past it as a kid, and I used to say, one day I'm going to live there. Don't know why. It just so happened that way. Then lived overseas for quite a while, more than 20 years. And then I decided to come home and have my family. I hadn't been home for about 20 years. I was here for a year, and then my father passed away. It was a really life-changing moment for me when he passed, because I had been overseas for such a long time. I looked for ways to connect with him. The place where I felt closest to him was on the whenua, and I used the whenua to help me through my grieving process because it connected me with him. The process was hard, and it took 5 years, and I was wounded because I had lost my father. But I used it to heal. I used the process to heal.
Returning to Aotearoa after 20 years wasn't the homecoming she imagined. And like for many of us, it was actually an uncomfortable period of navigating, finding her place and finding herself. She was still figuring out who she was in her own country.
I was still rediscovering who I am in my own country because I'd been living overseas for such a long time, and so integration back into New Zealand was really difficult for me. I didn't actually really want to be here. There was a lot of misunderstandings and misconceptions. I feel like the processes or the structure that is set up by the government or the Māori Land Court doesn't work in the favour of Māori people. You know, preservation of land is good, but it doesn't put people back on the land. And I come from a place where I think we can put people onto the land and teach them kaitiaki through lived occupation. In my work, I see the disconnection from the whenua with people every day. So it's like you take away the land, you take away a person's belonging, and you take away, you know, their sense of self and connection. And that is an imbalance. Like we talk about ecosystems and preservation of land and all of that kind of thing, but humans are also an ecosystem, and the land can't thrive without thriving humans.
The system she's describing centres on the legal structures created by the Māori Land Court to manage whenua Māori, where the many landowners or shareholders are administered and governed by a small group of elected trustees, which in this case is an Ahu Whenua Trust. On paper, they protect the land, but in practice, Āwhina says they can trap people out of it.
Moving up to the whenua, it took 5 years, a lot of arguments, a lot of having to learn about compliance and processes and governance and all of the different things that go with that. I think one of the biggest fights that I had was with actually whānau members, but that's the structure. right? The structure is set up in such a way to cause in-house fighting. So at the moment, yes, Māori own land, but we are disproportionately represented. We don't have houses, but we have the land. The structure is set up in a way that multiply owned land is protected because it has multiple owners. And then they put Āwhina trusts in charge of that land to manage it for the multiple owners. So yes, the land is preserved, but the structure keeps people from being able to move back on it.
She's been on the whenua for 10 years now, and that vantage point gives her clarity on what the system costs, not just in money or the basic infrastructure necessary to live, but actually the costs it has on the livelihoods of our people.
I've been up on the whenua for 10 years now. We're off-grid, sustainable, all of the words that everybody, strives for. My initial intent was to show people how easy it is to put a house onto the whenua for under $100,000. And I achieved that. I'm proud of that. And so if we look for ways that we can put people back onto the land and teach them that kaitiakitanga, teach them that sustainability, teach them that, you can have all of these things. We are the kaitiaki of this whenua, but the structure keeps us generationally poor. Everyday whānau don't have the capacity or the knowledge or the education about the policy, the procedure, all that kind of a thing. And it's also finance is limited. When we moved up to the whenua, you couldn't get a kāinga whenua loan. You couldn't do all of the things. You had to pay resource consent. You had to pay for your own power. Up to our property, it was going to be about 3 power poles, and then you have to buy the transformer, then you have to connect to the grid, then you have to pay a power bill. It was $150K. So we decided to do it in a different way. I can say living on the land, I've seen maybe 6 or 7 people try to come onto the land with no success because they run out of resource. So yeah, I think about it all the time about how for my mokopuna, I want to see them be able to live and thrive on the whenua, and for that whenua to create opportunity for them, opportunity for generational wealth. Until my last living blood relative, that piece of whenua will be in my whānau. So that is my mokopuna, my mokomoko, and so on and so forth. It would be really good if the structure was looked at and changed in such a way that is the same, because there is one rule for general title and one rule for Māori land title.
Even when whānau manage to get through the system and build on the land, the banks are waiting with another set of rules.
A couple of years ago, I wanted to build a 4-bedroom home because my son was born, our family grew bigger. So I went to the bank, we put through everything, and then came the day to go sign the loan application. And I asked her something made me ask the question about what happens if in 20 years I want to remortgage the house and change my roof. Oh no, you can't do that. Today you sign a piece of paper that takes away that right for you to be able to do that. So essentially, Māori, if you have the fight to get up onto the land, it still doesn't matter anyway because your house is worth nothing. So you can have $450,000, $500,000 house sitting in a paddock that is not worth anything to your children. It's not worth anything for the future generations. The only thing that it is good for is that you can be sure that your people will always have a place to go. There are so many disparities in the way that the system is set up. So it's set up to keep us down, is what I would say.
And this is where the Ahu Whenua Trusts come back into the picture, because those appointed as trustees can be the biggest barrier, especially if they aren't willing to let the next generation grow into that future that we all aspire for.
Herein lies where the Ahu Whenua Trusts come into play. And so the Ahu Whenua Trusts are a legal structure that is created by the Māori Land Court. So multiply owned land gets to choose trustees who come onto an Ahu Whenua Trust, and their job is to take care of the whenua, to preserve it, but also to make it economically viable for the owners. I think the problem, the main thing that happens inside of an Ahu Whenua Trust, I'm on an Ahu Whenua Trust, the older generations need to make room for the younger generations to come through to make the whenua viable for the future generations. If they sit there and block and don't make changes, then we are going to be in the same position in another 10 years. It is my wish and part of my vision to get in there. I saw the potential of what can happen on whenua Māori. We have time to make a change and to make differences for our kids and for our mokopuna.
So what was it that really brought her back after 20 years away, after a life built overseas? What pulled her home?
I think what brought me home was definitely my children. It was definitely that I got hapu and I owed it to my parents. Is pretty much. I owed it to them to come home and for them to meet their mokopuna, and it just so happened that we moved back. We stayed with my mum and dad for a bit, maybe a year. I think in that time, there was no plan. I was supposed to come back for a year and then we were supposed to leave again. And then my father passed away and everything changed. He was so passionate about the whenua and his people. And I used to think to myself, oh my gosh, he was always that kaupapa and going here and helping this person and that person, get onto the whenua. And I never understood why. And it wasn't until I went through that process myself, I understood why.
The journey to the whenua took 5 years. And it wasn't just bureaucratic. It was emotional, physical, and deeply lonely. She didn't do it alone. Her mum was beside her every step of the way. And the first barrier, before the courts, before the banks, was often the trust itself.
In my experience, it's really a difficult process for Māori to go through. I basically had to fight in a time that I was grieving, and it was hard. Because there's no readily available information and there's no education, you can't pick up a book and go, oh, you've got to do this, 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 and this. You have to find it. I spent time in the library going through electoral rolls, trying to find owners. And so just that whole process was long and sad. It was tiring. I had my mum, so she kind of knew some of the processes. So we worked together. She wrote letters. We put it into the paper. We had to advertise that we were having a meeting so that landowners could attend the meeting. We sent letters out to shareholders, and not everybody kind of replied to that because a lot of people thought that we were trying to take their land, when in actual fact all we were trying to do was occupy our own. First of all, you have to get a letter of occupation from the Ahu Whenua Trust who take care of the land. In some cases, this can be your first barrier. because there might be an uncle, an auntie, or somebody that's on this trust that doesn't want you to occupy the land. What I learned in my journey is that tall poppy syndrome is alive and well within our own whānau. And it's very difficult for them to see others trying to do something that probably they want to do too, but they just haven't got the resources to be able to do it. So this is where a lot of people kind of slip up. So you can get your right to occupy, and then that means you can basically move up and live on your whenua. But if you want to do it in a more structured way, then you go through the Māori Land Court and you get a licence to occupy. If you don't get a licence to occupy, then after, I think it's 2 years, if you put a whare onto the whenua, it will become the legal property of the trust because you haven't put it through Māori Land Court. You have to do it properly in order for that to be your whare. What was happening at that time, people were getting permission and then land banking and going overseas, making money and coming back. When I went through the court, the judge didn't allow me to do that. So he said, you have 2 years to put something onto the whenua. We did have a home in Hamilton, which we sold. And then I used absolutely everything that we had so that we could shift our whare onto the whenua.
6 months, no power, no running water, no toilet. Most people would walk away. Āwhina calls it the best time of her life.
Wasn't anything flash. We just got a relocatable home. I found a house in Paingaroa, shifted it up onto the land. We only took the middle part of the whare because it had 2 wings that came off the whare, but we didn't take it because it was like water damage and that kind of thing. And so the day that we moved the house up to the whenua, I couldn't go because we didn't do insurance. Because it was a lot. The house moved up. There was no power. We didn't have running water. We had no toilet. We lived that way for maybe 6 months. We would, we didn't have a fridge. We didn't have TV. We didn't have all of the things that people have. We lived by candlelight. We took our kids to the hot pools in Ōkauia to have a shower. And at the time I was studying, so I would travel up to Auckland and stay at my cousin's and do all our washing and stuff while I was up in Auckland. So we had 2 big holes in our walls from where it was connected to the other parts of the house, and we just put a tarp on there. And then my cousin came to visit and he was like, you really need to have a wharepaku. So he built a wharepaku for the kids. It wasn't about us, it was about the kids. So we often talk about that time in terms of it was simple. You don't actually need all of the things because we were fine. We were happy. We played board games. We played cards. We lived actually the life that I had dreamed of, to be on my whenua, with my whānau, living simply. Our house isn't big, it's small, but it's enough. This is my forever. It will always be about the journey for me and how we got there.
And now she thinks about how to give that same thing to others. Not just her own whānau, but hapu and iwi across the motu.
I think the key conversations for the future generations is it sits around educating our tamariki and our whānau in how to utilise the whenua. Long term, it has to be a framework that can be utilised in many different hapu, many different iwi, so that we are kotahitanga, we're working together to create a better future for the future generations. The generations coming through are more connected, more grounded into their whakapapa, their whenua, their reo, their everything in being Māori. I mean, Māori people are resilient, right? We've been through so much. My hope would be that we strengthen our children and mokopuna so much so that we create a thriving future for Māori and generational wealth. Like, generational wealth to me is putting people back onto the land, giving them a sense of belonging, giving them hope for the future, teaching them how to, take care, how to grow a mara, how to do all of the things that we used to do as a people. So the structure has taken us away from the land because we need to work and we need to provide. And so I think Māori are supposed to have our village, and we are supposed to have our hapu, our hapori. We are supposed to have all of that around us to help us thrive. And the structure of legal things that we need to do keeps us away from creating that future that we deserve.
Ko te kura nui, ko te kura roa, ko te kura o ta whiti nā te haepo. Tēnei te tira ho, tēnei hara mai nei, ko te umurangi nā te whatea peti. Nau mai e tama ki te Taiao nei, ki te tūmata kuru, ki te taronga, ngā tairora e ngā hau e kupe, I waiho I te ao nei. Piki ake kake ake ki te toe huarewa, te ara o tā whaki, piki ai ki runga, I roko hina tūra mai kuku mākaka, hāpai o maui he wahai pāmai. Taku ahine purotu, taku tāne purotu, kōru